Dark Souls is a 2011 action-adventure video game developed by From Software. I personally feel that Dark Souls is one of the best and most well-designed games ever made, and in the following video I will discuss my reasons why I think this is. I will break my review into 3 different sections: gameplay, story, and level design. The game begins with a cutscene that explains the premise of the game, the world, and the characters that will eventually show up. It also shows various other plot points such as the Age of Light and Age of Dark, and the Undead Curse, which basically causes humans to resurrect when they die. And that's about it. Other than the ending cutscene and a few cutscenes showing things like boss intros and area transitions, the opening cutscene is the most story we get from the game. The rest of the story is up for the player to find themselves. This could be from having conversations with NPCs, reading flavor text on items, and the world's design. It's because of this that Dark Souls is my favourite method of storytelling, where the game doesn't tell you much and it's up to the player to seek out the story. Even with this, the story is still very minimalistic, and a lot is left up to the player's interpretation. This design philosophy is because of the game's director, Hidetaka Miyazaki. When he was a child, Miyazaki loved to read Western fantasy books. However, his ability to read English was not perfect. There were some parts of the books he simply couldn't read, and he let his imagination fill in the blanks that his English comprehension left. He would imagine what happened, how it happened, and why. Miyazaki never forgot the thrill he would get from doing this. This is the reason Dark Souls' story is so cryptic. He wanted to give the player the same feeling he got from reading his books. Dark Souls takes place in the world of Lorjan. This world feels very real. It feels like a living, breathing world. A world that has existed before the Chosen Undead arrived and will continue to exist after they've gone. I think the world feels alive because of the characters that live in it. Every side character in Dark Souls has their own story, or at least a part in someone else's. All of these stories have their own arc, with a beginning, middle, and an end. The Chosen Undead will encounter these characters at various stages during the game. This makes the world feel real because the characters are doing their own thing away from the player. Dark Souls has 2 core mechanics. One of these is exploration. The game takes place in a large, seamless open world, with different areas all connected to each other. The biggest thing players have to keep in mind when exploring the levels in Dark Souls is that you must proceed with caution. When you first enter a new area, move slowly and be ready for an attack. If you have a shield, make sure it is always raised, and when you eventually die you have to learn from your past mistakes, and if you feel like an area is too hard, find another way around, or go explore previous areas until you find new ones. When exploring these levels, you will fight a lot of enemies, and this is where the game's second core mechanic comes into play: combat. All things considered, Dark Souls has a relatively simple combat system, with only several moves the player has to remember: a light attack, a strong attack, shield raising, and rolling. As the player starts to get familiar with this system, they will start to use more advanced techniques such as parrying, riposting, and performing critical attacks. Along with this, you have to deal with your stamina going down with every attack and block you do. This becomes its own mechanic where you have to learn to effectively manage your stamina in order to survive. Another mechanic that is important is the Estus system. Drinking this will regain a small amount of HP, however the amount of Estus you can use is limited, starting at only 5 in the beginning of the game. And that's it. The combat doesn't evolve or develop from there, which some people may see as an issue with the game, but I don't. I feel like it's in the style of easy to learn, hard to master. Over time you'll eventually get the hang of it and easily dispatch your enemies. This gives the player a sense that they are getting stronger as a character and overcoming the difficulties they initially faced. While I'm talking about the gameplay of Dark Souls, I feel like I should mention one thing. Dark Souls is hard. Dark Souls is really hard. In fact, the most iconic part of Dark Souls is the small "you died" message that appears upon death. But I think the brilliance of Dark Souls is that, yes, it's very difficult, but it's almost always fair. I think the fairness of the game comes from the fact that the combat is so simple. Every enemy in the game, regardless if they are a regular enemy or massive boss, are defeated in the same way. Recognize attack patterns, defend oncoming attacks, and exploit openings. And I do mean every enemy in the game. From the first hollow soldier you encounter in Firelink Shrine to the final boss of the game, if you apply these tactics to every encounter in the game, you will win. You'll die a lot while doing it, maybe from a poorly timed roll or bad stamina management, but you will eventually win. When talking about the difficulty of Dark Souls, Miyazaki said he wanted to give the players a sense of accomplishment by overcoming tremendous odds, and this is exactly what happens when you defeat a foe after many, many failed attempts. Dark Souls is known for having some of the best level design in 3D gaming, but when I was making this video I realised that good level design is sort of hard to explain. It's difficult to summarise what actually makes a level well designed, although I will attempt to explain why the level design of Dark Souls is one of my favourite aspects of the game. My favourite thing about the level design of Dark Souls is the interconnected feeling that the levels and the overall world has. One of the biggest contributors to this feeling is the fact that the game makes use of shortcuts, like ladders and locked doors, to make the world look back on itself and create connections to areas that were previously unknown to the player. And you get this amazing feeling when you realise where the shortcut takes you, and because the level design is so good, it all makes perfect sense within the world. An example of this in my first playthrough was the door in the Valley of Drakes. In that area, there are these giant iron doors that you cannot open. I spent a long time fighting past the enemies and attempting to open the door in order to see what was inside, but I eventually gave up and continued through the level. But those doors always remained in the back of my mind. About 30 hours later, I was in New Londo pushing a large wheel that would open the floodgates and allow me to continue through the area by draining the water. After the cutscene ended, I slid down a ladder to the area that was drained and saw some enemies that looked very familiar, and then I realised where I was. I was back in the Valley of the Drakes. This absolutely blew my mind and is definitely one of my favourite moments in the game. This is just one example, but Dark Souls is filled with moments like this. Dark Souls is also really good at providing exposition through its level design. Now I should make it clear that exposition is not a game's story. A game designer called Greg Cassavan said exposition was the deliberate arrangement of a game's content, including its structure, systems, and its narrative in support of the game's experiential goals. Now for Dark Souls, the overall experience is the feeling you get from overcoming incredible odds by killing huge monsters. Dark Souls uses its level design to tell stories that achieve the game's experiential goals. The example I'm going to use to explain this is the dragon encounter from Undead Burg, and how a mini 3-act story arc is told. When we first see the dragon, it flies down briefly in front of the player before flying off again. This is the inciting incident that will mean something later. Making your way through the area is ascending action, which eventually culminates in the climax of Act 1, which is the boss battle with the Taurus demon. Once that fight is over, the player encounters several obstacles in the form of different enemies, and then there is a good chance that they are killed by the dragon on the bridge. This is the midpoint of Act 2. The player trying to make it back to where they died in order to pick up the massive amount of souls they lost is a disaster or a crisis. The climax of Act 2 is finding the ladder shortcut back down to the bonfire, and the climax of Act 3 is eventually defeating the dragon. Then the action descends and you can finally level up, and the small 3-act story arc comes to an end. Using the game's level design to tell stories is absolutely brilliant, and it just goes to show how much effort the team at FromSoft put into the level design of Dark Souls. Even though I spent the last few minutes trying to sum up why I love Dark Souls, I feel like it's a game you have to experience for yourself. You have to fight the bosses, you have to explore the world, and you have to die in order to understand what this game is really about. I hope you've enjoyed my brief look at Dark Souls. Thank you for watching.